If you would take your Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 5. Pastor has been preaching through 1 Thessalonians and really going through a model of church discipleship and what that looks like. And he's been encouraging, admonishing, and then requesting even for himself that we would be bold in our speech and bold in even our proclamation of the gospel, that we would be able to communicate Christ with others. And I found this to be a familiar story here in 2 Kings, but one that is also very powerful and actually relates with that theme as well. And it's a visible example of someone speaking, someone who was very small and insignificant, and yet it had a very great impact for the glory of God. It's a story that, if you've grown up in church, you know well. It's the story of Naaman. Naaman, we would refer to him as the leper, the guy who had leprosy. And it's also the story of a little girl, a little maiden, who was captured. So really the title of the sermon is A Great Man's Problem and a Little Child's God. A great man's problem and a little child's God. And that's what we'll be looking at this morning in 2 Kings chapter 5. 2 Kings 5, it begins, we'll start reading in verse 1. And it says, "Now Naaman, a captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man." So here the first character is introduced. And who is this man? He's actually, in the midst of 2 Kings, he's actually an enemy. Naaman, he's the captain of a host, an army, but it's not Israel's army. It's not Judah's army. He's commander or captain of the army of Syria. Where is Syria? That's just to the north of Judah, of Israel, really. Next door neighbors. And what had been going on at this time? Well, here we are in 2 Kings. 1 Kings covers the reign of King David, King Solomon, and we see a little bit of that coming into 2 Kings. But what happens immediately after Solomon's reign? Good things? Not so much. Solomon, greatest king. We maybe could argue that David was, but Solomon, with his wisdom, his might, his power, he was definitely the richest. It's definitely when the kingdom of Israel was at its greatest, its biggest, all of that. And then what happens? His son comes on the scene. The nations actually revolt, the 10 tribes to the north, because they don't want to pay the high taxes anymore. The kingdom splits. And then you get this series, if you've read through it, of king after king after king who's just doing what they want to do, ignoring God, disobeying his law, his commandments, and the people, it's like they're lost. They're not sure what is right. The temple, even the first king, had started, after Solomon, had started giving away items from the temple to appease the other kings, to try to get them so they wouldn't attack him. And it just got worse and worse. And what did God do? What was God's response to his people ignoring him? To them not going through with proper worship as he had asked them to? Well, he sent judgment. And that judgment came in the form of the surrounding armies. And who were those? Well, it's the Philistines, it's the Syrians, but then the Assyrians and Babylonians, they also come onto the scene. And eventually, not quite here, but eventually those take captive all the people of Judah and Israel. So it's in the midst of this turmoil that we find ourselves. It's actually in the midst of some of these fights between kings of Judah and Israel and the surrounding kings that we find ourselves. And it's also in the midst of a great prophet, a great man of God who we'll see. This is Elisha. Elijah was the first one. Elisha then came onto the scene, taking his place. And the passage we find ourselves in is actually in the middle of Elisha's miracles. Right before this, what had Elisha done? He had promised a woman that she would have a child even though she was older in age, and she did. And that same child actually died, and Elisha brought him back to life. And there's also the story of the widow who didn't have any food, but Elisha came and her oil and flour never ran out. And God provided in that way. And so that's the previous chapter, is multiple miracles. And then we come to this. But that's miracles, or God helping his own people, the children of Israel. Here in 2 Kings 5, it's different, because we find God is going to help someone who's not from Israel, someone who actually Israel would view as an enemy. So who is this man? Naaman, a captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man in valor. So how would you describe this man? This man would be a man's man, right? He's not sitting on the couch eating potato chips, playing video games. He is on the front line, fighting battles, leading men to victory. This man was the captain of the host of the king of Syria. In other words, he had a great charge given to him. He was in charge of a lot. He oversaw a lot, the whole army of this entire kingdom just north of Judah, of Israel. He was a man that was great in the eyes of his master. In other words, the king of Syria himself greatly respected him. He would delegate and give authority to this person. He had that power behind him because of his reputation and the quality of life. He was honorable, the Bible says. This idea, the word literally means lifted up before faces. It has that idea of someone who everybody looks up to. An honorable person, someone you could say, yes, I respect this person. So he had a great charge. He was a great man with a great respect. Why? Well, because by him, by Naaman, the Lord. Wait a minute. The Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. This guy is not an Israelite. What's God doing helping him, right? Well, what this shows us, though, is that our God is not just the God of the select, of the few. He's the God over all nations. And he gives his authority, his power, to whom he wills. Even if that is, at this point in Israel's history, the enemy, the Syrians. And so God had given deliverance. You know, in that time, the pagans, those people that weren't part of Israel, they would give military victory. They would give credit to their gods, their idols. They would say, if they won a battle, it was my God who gave me this victory. But here in this verse, we see that it wasn't these fake, false idols, but it was Yahweh, Jehovah himself, that had given Naaman this deliverance. And what is this deliverance? He was able to take captives from Israel into Syria. And we'll see that later. So God, he controls all. So even from the beginning, we see something very important about our God, how great he is and how mighty he is. That even this mighty man, God is bigger, God is greater, God is over him. And it continues on in the verse, and it says, he was also a mighty man in valor. Just in case you hadn't got it yet, he was a great, powerful warrior. This is not someone you'd want to go one-on-one against. This is not someone you'd even want to put your army up against, as seen here. When we think of mighty man in valor, we often think of David's mighty men. These men, these select few that did heroic feats for their king, their David. But here, this guy is on the other side, doing great and mighty things. So here we have Naaman, captain, king of the king. He's a great man. He has great respect. He's very powerful, a great warrior. But there's one little word at the end. And it's translated, but he was a leper. And that is actually just one word. It gives all these descriptions, and at the very end, it just literally says, a leper. So he had all of these things going for him, but what was he really known for? being a leper. And what was leprosy? Well, leprosy in our day, we still have or an idea of that. It's a bacteria that will infect the skin and actually cause a lot of pain and disfiguration. It included that, but in the Bible times, it included a wide variety of skin diseases. But it's something that was noticeable. In other words, when you looked at him, you would see it. Because often leprosy is referred to, someone came out, either their hand had leprosy on it, and it's referred to their hand being as white as snow. And that's something you'd notice if someone had discolored skin. And so it was a disease. It was a disease that caused people to be ousted from society. In other words, you didn't want to hang out with the lepers. Think to Christ's time. Where were the 10 lepers? Were they in the city? No, they were thrust out. Or even think of Elijah's time where the city was being besieged. It was the lepers who went out because they're like, we don't have anything to lose. There was a famine. We don't have anything to lose. We're going to go out and see if we can find food. If they kill us, well, we're already dead men, basically. We're walking dead people in their minds, is how they were treated. And it was something that he was stricken with, that Naaman himself had. This was something he had no control over. Did he have control over his stature and his great might and his warrior abilities? Yeah, we'd say that's something that makes him, defines him. But this leprosy was something that he had no control over. It had stricken him. So here is this great man with a great problem. So what's going to happen? Well, in verse 2, we find that there's a little child. And it says, and the Syrians had gone out by companies, it's really their armies are going out, and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid. This is in direct contrast to a great man. Here's this little maid or little girl. And who is she? She's really no one. In our mind, she's a nobody. That word little, it just means small, young, and unimportant. Someone where we don't even have her name here. She's just a little girl. We wouldn't know, we wouldn't think anything of her. Not only that, though, there's two other things that are described that are given to her, that she's a captive. So she's been taken captive by this man's army. Her family could have been, but here she is. So she's actually someone's property. Someone has taken her and used her for their own gains and benefits. And then it also says that she waited on Naaman's wife. That she was a servant, in other words. That she was always before Naaman's wife, and if she was told to do something, she had to do something. So here we have this small, unimportant, insignificant, captive, slave, servant girl that enters the story. And she did something really quite powerful, spectacular. She spoke. That's all she did. Look at verse 3 where it says, and she said. And she said unto her mistress, this would be Naaman's wife, would God, this is the same God that had given Naaman the deliverance, the victory in battles, and she's saying, would God that my Lord Naaman were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. What is she showing by this? She's showing that she has heard and knows of this great God. She's heard then about this man of God, Elisha, that we'll look at in a minute. She's heard about the miracles that he has done and the great things that he has wrought. And so she has faith. She believes her God can do something amazing, spectacular. If Naaman, the guy who captured me, by the way, who I'm now a slave to, if I could just get him to this man of God, God could heal him of the one thing that he can't change. And what happens from there? Verse 4, one went in and told his Lord, saying, thus and thus said the maid that is of the land of Israel. She didn't even say it to Naaman directly, but because of the power of her own words, it got relayed to him. At this point, what do you think Naaman's thinking? He's probably a little desperate. Mighty man with leprosy. Sure, I'm willing to try anything, right? So what does he do? Well, he gets both kings involved. He gets the king of Syria involved and the king of Israel involved. And here we see the two proud kings kind of battling back and forth a little bit, or at least a little scared of each other, because of course they've been at war with each other. And now one is asking a favor of another, and there's got to be some tension there. And what happens? And it says in verse 5, and the king of Syria said, Go, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. Not unto the man of God, but unto the king of Israel. And he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 pieces of gold and 10 changes of raiments. What is that? The king is sending to one other king, who, by the way, he just captured some of his people. So this is a little weird, a little awkward situation, right? They're going back and forth. And he's saying, I have a favor of you, and I have to sweeten the pot a little bit. So what does he send? He sends things that, we'd appreciate. Silver, gold, and raiments. The gold alone here was probably about 600 people's annual wages. So if we take everyone in this room, usually have about 250, we double the number of people, add a little bit more, all of our annual wages put together, that's the gift we're sending over, okay? So it was probably a little chunk of change. We'll just put it that way. And he had this letter, and he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now, when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him, or the idea is cure him, restore him, put him back to where he was, of his leprosy. So king to king, here's what I want you to do. I want you to cure this guy of an incurable disease. Okay, that's what I'm asking. And I'm sending a lot of money, because I know things have been a little awkward, but also to sweeten the deal, okay? Verse 7, it came to pass, how do you respond? Well, I think this is typical. The king of Israel had read the letter. He rent his clothes. Well, good thing he just got fresh garments, right? The guy just sent him new changes. What is this meaning? Well, renting or tearing your clothes was a sign of despair at times, or a sign sometimes of humility before God. Here, I think it's the sign of despair. He's like, what are you coming to me for? You think I can cure cancer? I can cure leprosy? You think I got it in me? And that's what he says. Am I God? The God that had given Naaman the deliverance, he'd give him a victory in battle. The God that this little girl speaks of and says, this God can heal. The king is now saying, wait, you're asking me. You're asking me? I'm not God. Am I God to kill and to make alive? He goes that far. It's not just curing, but you're putting me in a position where you're asking me to give life to something that I can't, to kill, to give life. That this man doth send me to recover, there's that word again, recover, restore, cure, a man of his leprosy. Wherefore consider, I pray you, see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. So what's the basic response? You're crazy, and you're just trying to pick a fight. That's what you're doing here, king of Syria. I know we've had, these tussles back and forth. You've captured some of my people, all of this. You're just looking for a fight. You're trying to mock me, basically. You think I'm God? You're just trying to quarrel with me. And so he tears his clothes, and he's distraught. Because this guy has already beat him up once, right? What happens if I don't fulfill his request? He might do it again. So there's some tension here. But then in verse 8, we see the man of God enter the scene. And throughout 1st and 2nd Kings, when it comes to Elijah and Elisha, they're both referred to as the man of God. And they're representing God to the people. So it's not really their power or their own might that they're resting in, but it's more that they're a conduit and they're really showing who God is to the people. So it's not so much that these are Elisha's miracles. That's not the point. The point is these are God's miracles that are being wrought through Elisha. The king doesn't even think, though, to go to the man of God. Why do you think that is? Well, it's not like we've really been paying attention to God recently, right? It's not like we've been trying to follow him. That's why all this judgment has been coming. So the king doesn't even go to Elisha, but it says in verse 8, and it was so when Elisha, the man of God, had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, the news gets around, that he sent to the king. So Elisha actually sends to the king, and he says to the king, so Elisha is saying to the king, wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. And who is he talking about? He's talking about Naaman there. Let Naaman come to me, and let Naaman see that there is a true prophet, someone who's actually following God and speaks for God in Israel. So, verse 9, Naaman, this great mighty warrior, came with his horses and with his chariot and stood at the door of Elisha. And what does Elisha do? Does he come out and heal him? No. It says Elisha sent a messenger. He just sent another insignificant, small person unto him, and the messenger said to him, go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again unto thee, and thou shalt be clean. This is all you got to do, Naaman. You got to go. You got to go down into Israel. You got to go to the Jordan River. Can't use one of your rivers. Just have to go into the Jordan River, small river at that time. Muddy. Not necessarily as clean as we would think of some rivers. Go in there, and all you have to do is you just have to dip down 7 times. So just go under, count them 7 times. You come out, your flesh shall come again, or shall be restored. Your flesh is going to come back, and thou shalt be clean. But what happens? There's actually a dilemma, because Naaman gets mad. He gets mad because he wants a cure, not cleansing. He wants the recovery part, and he focuses on the cleansing part. You see, in the Old Testament, there was actually laws given to lepers, that if they were to be healed of that and become clean, there were certain things they had to go through. And this wasn't just like a one-day process. This was like a 1 to 2 week process where you have to do these ritual washings. You have to bring lambs and kill them and then go before the priest, and the priest takes some of the blood and puts it on your right ear and your left toe, something like it. It was this whole ritual that you had to go through to be declared in the sight of the people, but really in the sight of God, to be declared clean. And Naaman's like, I'm not really interested in that, and plus I don't want to follow your silly suggestion here. So in verse 11, Naaman was wroth. He was really angry. And he went away and he said, behold, I thought. That's where most of us get into trouble, right? Behold, I thought. This is supposed to be done my way, right? If I want cleansing, if I want to be clean, or even clean before God, I thought I want it my way. I thought this is what the man of God would do. Surely he would come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper. What is he asking for? He's asking for a pretty big show here, right? This would sell TV ads right here. Guy with leprosy, man of God comes out. There's a lot of this falsehood going on today, isn't there? But man of God comes out, the true man of God. I want him to just put his hand on me, call out to God. I'm healed. Boom. Someone is doing something for me. And not only that, are not Abana and Pharpar, or Par, and these are rivers in Damascus where he's from, are not these rivers better than all the water of Israel? And we know how this is, right? Where's the best drinking water? Don't answer. But you know where that is, right? You have a favorite place, and then you move somewhere, and you realize the drinking water is just not as good, right? The water's way better over there. It tastes way better. And that was his idea towards Israel. This water, I don't want to go to that water. Jordan, dirty? No. Why can't I just use the rivers that we have here? And can't I wash in them and be clean? Like if I'm going to be clean, yeah. And so he's like, I can do this anywhere. I can take a bath anywhere is basically the idea. And to get clean. But I don't want to just be clean. I want to be cured from this. And so he turned, the end of verse 12, and went away in a rage. Is that not how a lot of people respond to God's message to us? A lot of times, that's our natural response. I thought, no, I don't want your way, God. I'm going to turn away in a rage. Because what is this asking of Naaman? What is it asking him to do? Well, yeah, it's asking him to go to a river. It's asking him to dip 7 times. But really, it's asking him to believe. It's asking him to have faith. To have faith in the words of the prophet. To have faith in the words of the man of God. It's having to have faith in what God says. And this is what is being required or asked of Naaman. And he's saying, no, I thought. And he goes away in a rage. But thankfully, there are people around him. And in God's providence and in God's grace and in his long suffering, God has put these people around him that come back to him. And again, it's an insignificant, unimportant, small person. Who is it? Verse 13, and his servants came near. We don't even get these people's names. We don't get the little girl's name. We don't get the messenger of Elisha's name at this time. Later, his name could be given. And we don't get the name of Naaman's own servants that come to him and spake unto him and said, my father, if the prophet, that man of God, is what they're referring to, had bid thee to do some great thing, wouldst thou not have done it? And that's what he's referring to. This man's going to come out, put his hand on me, heal me, great thing. You would have done that. How much rather then when he saith unto thee, wash and be clean? In other words, what he told you to do, it really isn't that hard. It's not that difficult. But what does it take? It takes faith. It takes humility. Are you going to believe the words of God? So that's the dilemma, and then we come to the actual cleansing, the cure, in verse 14 and 15. Where it says, and then he went down, and he dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. He did what God told him. And 2 things happened. He dipped himself. The 2 things that happened after he dipped himself. His flesh came again like unto the flesh of what? Of a little child. That same word, little, is the same word that was used to describe that maiden. There's a little maiden, and now Naaman himself is a little child, as having to become this little child. But his flesh was restored. He was cured. That's what he wanted. And it also says he was clean. 2 things here. He was restored and he was clean. There was cleansing that came with this. In other words, it's implying here that there's not just the physical condition, but there's something going on inside of Naaman at this point in time too. There's something that happened when he had this faith, and we see then that faith expressed and revealed in the next verse, in verse 15, where it says, and he, Naaman, returned to the man of God, to Elisha, he and all his company, and came and stood before him. So now he's standing before him, but it's after the cleansing and after the cure, and said, behold, Before he said, behold, I thought. Verse 11, now in verse 15, he says, behold, now I know. And what does he know? That there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. What is he doing? He's professing faith and belief in the one and the only and the true God, not just of Israel, but of all of the land, of all of the world, of all of the people. And so here we see a great man humbled and having the faith of a little child. So when we talk about a great man's problem and a little child's God, the great man and the little child end up being the same person in the end. This great man, Naaman, becomes as a little child. And the God, the true God of all the universe, becomes his God as well. And this requires some dedication. We won't read, but later on he tries to offer a gift to Elisha, and Elisha refuses because he said, it wasn't me. I don't want to accept a gift when it was really God who did the healing. And he says, then Naaman says back to him, well, then could I at least, get some dirt for bricks so I can build an altar because I want to worship this God, Jehovah, Yahweh, that I have found. And he says, yeah, of course, you can do that. And that means something big for someone outside of Israel who's now claiming and coming to and worshiping the true God. That means he's having to put aside all the other false gods that he used to give credence to for his victories in war. He's actually putting those aside and claiming this. So, as we look at this story of a great man and a little child, what are some of the takeaways or points that we come to when it comes to our relationship with our great God and our relationship with others as we disciple? The first main thing that sticks out in this story, both at the beginning and the end, is that our God is the God over all. Our God is the God over all people. This isn't just a God that we have on Sunday mornings, that we confine to these walls, and we keep him here, and we talk about him with each other, and we say, yeah, he's a really good God. He's done some really great things for me. And see you next week. No, the God that we serve is not bound in temples made by human hands. He's not a God that is just over those that believe and call and worship him. Our God is the true God, the true creator over everything. What does Colossians tell us? By him and for him, all things were created, were made. So this God is a God who is Lord over all. And in Naaman's case, it was the God who had given him victory in battle. It was the God that had brought in his providence this little maid to tell him of the true God. It was this God who had healed him of his leprosy. And it was this God that Naaman now worshipped. So, what's the application then for you and to me? If God is God over all, and he is, what does that mean for you and for me? Well, that means even in tough circumstances not of our own choosing, circumstances like the little maid found herself in, the little girl, was God still God? And what I mean by that, was God still consistent with who he says he is? And who does God say that he is? He says he is great, and we've looked at that. He is God over all, he is creator. He also says that he is good, that he is a good and loving God. And he always has been and always will be. So is God still God in her situation when she's been captured? She's a slave, she's someone else's property. When she's been forgotten by all, she's young, she's small, she's insignificant. Is God still God? Yes. Or what about this? for you and for me, in our circumstances, is God still God? In the trials that God has providentially, in his purposes and order, he has put in your life, is God still God? Yes. But what about, not just to you and to me, what about to those who are outside of this building? Is God still God? And the answer we see from this text is yes. And he shouldn't, in that case, the application is, he shouldn't be just our God that we keep close, we love, or we say we love, that we serve, Sunday mornings, Tuesday nights, and that's it. This is the type of God that demands, that requires, that has commended his love towards us so that we would show that same love, that same God to others. So you see how this fits in with our idea of discipleship to those even outside of this building. Does God want to be their God just like Naaman claimed him as his God? In other words, does God still want to cleanse and heal people? Yes, he does. Does God love, and has he demonstrated and showed his love to all people? Yes, he has. And we see that the greatest demonstration of God's love is the cross, is Jesus Christ himself. And we see that in Romans, but God commendeth or demonstrated his love to us while we were yet sinners, while we were yet lepers, while we were yet unclean, while we were yet outside of the family of God. God showed, he proved his love through sending Christ to die, to take our place, to be the substitute for the judgment that you and I deserve. So God is a God over all people. That includes us, but it includes everyone else outside of here. So in your life this week, rejoice, but call to mind who our great God is. Remind yourself of that. But don't just do that. Speak of that great God to others. And that comes to the second main idea that we're going to pull out of this. And that idea is really just a little word from a little child can testify of a great God. In other words, it was just a little child, small, unimportant, insignificant. But yet, what did she do? What was the one action that she did? She said. She spoke. She used her words. And what did that mean? That means that she had to know something, right? Now, I'm not saying that everyone that speaks knows something. I'm up here, right? And we also have politicians. No. But what she was doing here is speaking of what she had experienced. It was as simple as that. In other words, this little girl, she didn't go, to my knowledge, it's not here in the text, she didn't go off to Bible college and get a degree. No, there's nothing wrong with that. It also says little, in other words, young. It's not like she had a lot of years of experience of practicing, what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? How do I just say it just the right way so that people will like me and accept me and all of that? No, she just simply spoke from the experience and the knowledge that she had. So, what's the application from that point alone is that do you have an experience, a knowledge of God, of what he has done for you, specifically, how he has saved you, how he has made you alive, how he has cleansed and cured you from the disease of sin. You have that experience if you are a believer. And it's really just as simple as speaking what God has done for you. She saw it, she said something. Sometimes And it's easy for all of us to do. We make the Christian life way more complicated than it really is. It's hard, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's not complicated, right? It's doing what God has called us to do. A little word from a little child can testify of a great God. In other words, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter your rank, your significance, how great you think you are or you aren't. Doesn't matter how polished you may be with your words. What did the little girl do? She simply spoke and said, I know what God's done for me. I've seen it. I've seen what God's done in my country. Would that my Lord, would that God, that Naaman were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. All she said. So small spoken words can greatly impact others. And that's really the application is who, this is what Pastor had us pray for the last week, is who can I speak to the name of God and to share the simple testimony of this is who God is. And that's what I believe this passage calls us to do as well. And what's the last thing? So our God is God overall. Little words from little children can testify of a great God. The last main point I want to pull out is that great, proud even, men with little childlike faith can be made clean, can be cleansed. And the reason I say it that way is sometimes we lose sight of that. Sometimes we forget that God is actually still wanting to cleanse people, to recover them. Why is that? Because we look at our world today and we say, it's messed up. And you're not wrong. Okay, there's some things that are messed up. Or we say, it's too hard. I don't think God could ever. Don't we like doing that, putting words in God's mouth? I thought. I don't think God could ever do this or save this person. But the story of Naaman also shows us that even people of great might, great stature, people that we would probably look at and say they're proud, they're stuck in their ways, they're mighty in their own right, they're just going to keep doing what they're doing, they are my enemy. Yet, God can cleanse even them. He can cure their disease of sin that separates us all from God, that creates that barrier so we can't have access to God. We can't have a relationship with God. And if we're all honest with ourselves, we may not have been a great person before we're saved, as in a mighty man or a mighty warrior. But if we're honest, we were all proud people. We all thought we had our own way, and that's what the Bible says. All we like sheep have gone astray. Every man we're turned to our own ways and devices and desires, selfishly following our own pursuits, even from a very young age. It doesn't take long before you know, this kid's a sinner, right? I have a 2-year-old. He can sin just as well, as anyone else. But it takes that little childlike faith, just like Naaman had. That childlike faith of saying, I'm going to take God at his word. And what has God said? He has said, whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. He has said, I've sent Christ. And Christ, who is God, has said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And it's really a simple childlike faith that all of us who are saved have had to have at multiple points, but at specifically the point of salvation in our life, where we say, I'm going to take God at his word and believe what he has said. That's what Naaman did. It was a simple, childlike faith, but yet it brought about cleansing. All the greatness in the world could not cleanse. In other words, you might be a really great person, you might be a really good person, but there's still the disease of sin that only Christ can cure. So, a great man's problem and a little child's God. And what's our desire? Our desire in our discipleship and evangelism of others is to see the great man become that little child. To see the great and proud around us come to faith in the great God who is God over all things. So this week, would you pray that God would strengthen you, would give you boldness even to speak, give you opportunities to speak? Now, Lord willing, it won't take getting captured and taken to a foreign country for us to do this. This is something, though, that we just face in everyday life. So there's a great man, a little child, proud kings, a man of God. The man faces a dilemma, but there is a cure, there is cleansing. And from this we see our God is God over all. A little word from a little child testifies of a great God. And great men with little child faith can be made clean.